of our correctional institution. He is married to one of the most beautiful women you'll ever see, Suzanne. They were married in 2010. Him and Suzanne moved to Camden 4 years ago, and they opened up this beautiful gallery last year. James and Suzanne, for me, will always be this group's patron saints. When we got to the end of last year, we had no place to go and no money to go. And Henry, Senator Gustafson, reached out to James and Suzanne and asked them if we could use this place. And they said yes. And I will forever be gracious. I'm not crying. I'm not crying. Not going to cry. I will forever be grateful to them and thankful to them, because them allowing us to come here has helped define this group for what we are and what we want to be. So as I say, I will always consider them to be the patron saints of this group. Now I give you Mr. James Austin.
Right.
Slight correction, Henry didn't reach out to me.
I begged
He
him.
ran. He gave me an order.
We're friends now. Don't let them think that. Just call me.
Thank you. How much time do I have?
As long as you want.
No.
You own the place, Dr. Austin.
All right, so let me just talk a little bit about the gallery. I got to give a pitching about the gallery. So Suzanne, my wife, and I, we bought this building when we did it. And as you can see, it's an art gallery, but also we put on special music events. And we had a great show last Saturday. We have another show this Saturday. New and old friends are going to play here. It's kind of a string for group people that are going to play oldies and goldies and stuff like that. But then on the 9th, Claire Bryant, who's a well-renowned cellist, is going to play here. She's releasing her album. So if you want to keep on top of our events, Melissa, who is Suzanne's sister, we've got a book. We've got a book, and you can sign up and you enjoy having people come and enjoy this space. One other thing, everything in this room is for sale. A couple of things. Lori Ison is our resident portrait artist. These are her renditions here, all the way around. All these portraits are hers, and inside here as well. Because you're so special, you get a 25% discount if you see something you like, or even more. So the furniture, everything, we're going to bring in some new art in about 30 days, so we want to move this art and have some fun with this space. All right, so I'm a criminologist, and what I want to do tonight is give you kind of like an overview of trends in what I call crime trends and in prison. My first job was working in the Illinois prison system, and I saw a lot of things happen back then. I went through a couple of riots, and met a couple of interesting people, so I learned about prisons, and then I got my advanced degrees and became a consultant. So a lot of my work now today is dealing with prison systems that are in trouble. So the Lee Correctional Facility in Riot called me in, and what I do, I put in place these classification management systems that are designed to fix the problem. And we've been very successful. Brian Sterling's a great director here, who has really been doing a great job with the resources that he has. My typical week, this week I'm going up to a small jail in Montana. Next week I go to Rikers Island. After that I go to the LA County Jail. So I'm constantly kind of traveling around the country and dealing with these situations. The discussion we just had is very interesting, and also your discussion too is going to fit into my little story here. So I'm going to first talk about crime and crime trends. And I'm speaking strictly as a criminologist. That's what I do. I study it, analyze it, and I spend a lot of time trying to figure out why crime rates go up and down and how to keep them as low So if we go way back in time, 1930, the crime rates in the country were fairly stable, with two exceptions, World War I and World War II. Same thing with the prison population. World War I and World War II, we saw drops in both crime and the prison populations. So why is that happening? Well, if you look at who commits crimes, there's some key demographic factors. Number one, it's men. Number two, it's young men. Number three is young men who are living in a disadvantaged situation, not being raised properly. Often in a single household where the mother is trying to raise the children by herself. So that crime rate kind of, with the exception of those two wars, was kind of flat. But then, in about 1965, 1966, it started to go up. When I say crime, the way we measure crime, we separate into violent crime and property crime. The most prevalent crime is theft. That is the dominant crime. Violent crime is not nearly as prevalent. Homicides are extremely rare. So I'll give you an example. Today's crime rate nationally is about 2,800 per 100,000 population. So we calculate as a rate per capita. Now what that means that in any given year, about 2.8% of us will report a crime to the police. 2.8%. Or put differently, about 97% of us do not. So crime is relatively rare. It's hard to believe that, because if you watch the news, you think it's all over the place. And that's because I also did a study in graduate school on news. What you learn quickly is that the most exciting story is what leads. And so if there's a crime story, that's going to lead. So if you watch the news, you're going to see that crime story every day on the news. And that's going to give the impression that crime is all over the place, but it's not. So it's a relatively low, what we call a low phenomenon. But back in 1965, it started to go up and went way up. It doubled. Crime rate doubled. So it got all the way up to like about 5,000, 6,000 per 100,000. Still, 6%, but it went way up. And after that, beginning in 1995, it went way down. Crime has gone almost down to where it was before 1965, not quite. So why did crime go up and why is it coming down? And again, go back to the same demographic factors. So if you look at baby boomers, I'm a baby boomer. So a lot of us, and in particular our girlfriends and wives, decided either not to have children or instead of having 4 children, which my parents did, have 1, maybe 2. So we measure that in terms of the fertility rate. So the fertility rate started to go up right after World War II. My father came home and he got busy, with my mother. And they had 4 children. And you can see the fertility rate going up. And if you lag that fertility rate by about 16 or 17 years, that's when young boys become what we call the age-prone years, which are generally 15 to 24. That's when males are most active in criminal conduct. That's when that population surged. And then, but the children of my parents, like me, and a lot of my friends, we did not have children, or if we did, we had only 1 child, and so the size of the household dropped. The number of juveniles being born dropped. Households, like I said, became instead of a 4-person household, they're down to 2. And women decided to have children later in life rather than right away. So it looks like, hard to believe, if you go to the mall, that children are being raised better today than they were before. And so it's hard to believe.
Can you say that?
But if you look at juvenile arrest numbers have just plummeted. And that's very significant in our work because the best predictor of someone becoming a criminal as an adult is whether they got arrested or not as a juvenile. So if we can cut that down quite a bit. So, South Carolina, same thing. Your crime rate went up, plateaued about 1985, stayed at a real high rate, and beginning 1994, it started coming down. And it has continued to come down. Hard to believe, but it's true, the crime rate dropped in 2020. Now, you're hearing a lot of news stories about how crime has gone up after COVID-19 and other things going on. COVID-19 actually suppressed the crime rate because people were not out doing things. So that in particular dropped real significantly. Homicides did go up. And this is kind of the interesting statistic. Homicide rates. Pardon?
Yeah, people like be stir crazy, like driving each other crazy.
Yeah. The one thing that did increase in the violent crime rate was the actual assault. What we call fights, stuff like that. That went down. 2020, COVID came in and everyone stopped going around, going to bars and stuff like that. But it's rebounded. Homicides did increase, and this is kind of the thing I talked about, how people play with statistics. The homicide rate used to be like about 10 or 12 per 100,000, which is 1/10 of 1%. And if you look at who's likely to kill or get killed, it's not people in this room. It's young boys who are not being raised properly. They know each other, and they're armed to the teeth. And so that's the problem. We got, and I'm, all my neighbors, I'm up in Lake Watering now, all my neighbors are armed to the teeth. I don't worry about them, because they know how to use their guns, and they're older. But I worry about a 15, 16-year-old armed to the teeth and trying to settle their dispute, with a gun. And that's what's been going on. So the homicide rate, though, has only gone up to where it was traditionally. So it was really low, like 4 per 100,000, but it's gone up to like 6. South Carolina has always had a higher crime rate than the national rate. Always. And that's related to, what we think are economic conditions and education. Education is another strong indicator as to whether or not you become involved in criminal conduct. So they call it, the school to the prison, pathway. If we can keep young, again, women in prison too, but they're such a small percent. It's really a male phenomenon. If we can somehow deal with that population of young males and raise them better, things will get even better. Crime rates went down again because of demographics, but the other thing that we discovered, and I do these projection models of crime rates, and we've been very accurate, is inflation. So as the inflation rate went up, crime rates went up. As the inflation rate went down, crime rates came down. And that's why we see a little bit of a bump now, because of that bump in inflation. So why is that? Well, we call that social stress. When people, again, in the low income brackets, they can't handle very well inflation at 9%. We can, we can get through it. We're not going to go out and steal something to make ends meet, but it does put some kind of stress, on people's everyday activities, and so that's something we're kind of keeping an eye on right now. Hopefully, it'd be good for the country. The inflation rate can come down for a variety of reasons, but also because of the crime rate. All right, so let's go to prisons, and that's one of my specialties. We've had just a massive increase in the prison population since 1970. How massive? Okay, when I started, I'll give you the statistic on South Carolina. When I started in 1970, the nation's prison population was under 200,000 people.
Wow.
Today it's 1.4 million. That's how big we bumped it up. South Carolina in 1970 had 2,800 people entire prison system.
2,800?
2,800.
Does that include the juvenile?
No, that's the
That's
adult,
just
adult
the-
prison
just the-
system.
Okay.
2,800 was your prison population in 1970. It reached a peak about 8 years ago at 25,000. So from 2,800 to 25,000. And as the senator knows, it's using a big chunk of the budget. I think it's 100 million. Is that what it's like?
It ends up being about $32,000 per prisoner, right?
Yeah.
So you can, if you want to break it down that way, I think
Yeah.
some people can wrap their heads around that number.
Now, the good news
32,000.
about South Carolina, is that that prison population has dropped. I won't say it's because of me, but I had a little bit to deal with it. But we brought it down now to 16,000. So from 25,000 down to 16,000. During that time period, crime rates were dropping. And this is why I try to tell people, your prison population is not going to solve your crime problem. It's these other things I talked about. Number of children are born, how they're raised, how we care for them. Those are the things that are going to drive your future crime rate. Yes?
Does literacy rate have an impact on that?
Does what?
Literacy rate?
Sure. Anything that has to do, with equipping people to be productive citizens. So if you can't read or write, you're kind of doomed almost in our society, in today's society.
And then another factor, this is something I observed as a high school teacher, was boys have to have a physical, and I raised two sons, like a physical sparring to establish dominance. And I would see that in the hallways, and I was a little astonished with all that physicality, but I think if it's channeled properly, they have an outlet. But I think parents, and particularly moms, try to force boys to have the same behavior model as a girl, and they don't want to see any of that. But I think it's a very natural thing for boys to kind of spar to try to establish dominance. Have you seen anything like that?
Well, most boys don't fight. I mean, there are the boys that fight. When I went to high school, we knew who they were. You kind of stayed away from them because they would come after you. But most boys, but there is, again, the male phenomenon is important here, and the young and the age. Those are the two big demographic factors that are related to criminal conduct.
Okay.
And yeah, there's something about the male species, I guess we can call it that, that is aggressive. And
Well, I mean, I
tries to
say
have
that
dominance.
because I raised two boys and I homeschooled them for 2 years and they were in with others. I mean, so it was kind of like the whole thing. I waited later to have children. I was involved in their religious education, their school activities, all of that stuff. But still, they were very physical. I mean, in spite of all of.
And boys have to have that rough and tumble play.
Right.
They have to have that. And I like to your point, not to mean to jump in front of everybody, but as a teacher, you have. It's like telling a kid with ADD to sit here for 3 hours and not. We had plenty of times where I had little boys. I wouldn't make them sit. As long as they were doing the work, they could stand and wiggle.
Yeah.
We don't offer them that opportunity to do that. And Maggie and I was talking about a while ago too, that we have parents who may have flunked out of school. Of course, I say school may have failed them, but I think what we're seeing is if you don't have that relationship with parents in the schools, the teachers, then teachers aren't going to trust you. Why should they support the teacher when they themselves weren't supported in the schools? There's that whole trust thing, and so you see these boys trying to figure out where can I fit in. So a lot of them join these gangs to have some sense of fitting in. I'm not the expert. I know you are. I just, based on being a former teacher, these are the things that my little boys would tell me. I don't fit in. I need a place to fit.
Wendy, can you out on that, just for clarification, the crime rate that you quoted for the state of South Carolina, did that include only violent crimes?
No. The crime rate consists of the following crimes: murder, rape, aggravated assault, robbery. Those are the violent crimes.
Right,
And then the
but-
property crimes are theft, burglary, auto theft.
Right, when you
And
said
arson.
the 60s, you were like.
Yeah, and
4500.
of those, by far the biggest chunk is theft. That's where most of the action is in theft. people stealing stuff.
When you saw the drop that you spoke of, just for a little clarification, was that due to any sort of intervention courts instead of, hey, here's hard time because X, Y, and Z? Here are these
Why did
special-
crime drop?
Right, like
No.
up to that month.
It
like,
happened
look at
because
the
of these
drop.
other things. It happened because of the demographics, fertility rates dropping, we have an aging population. Again, most males will grow out, they'll mature out of their, what do you call their
Right,
crime
but if they're in
prone
prison,
years.
they're just gonna get more violent, which is
Pardon?
like, but if they're in prison, they would just get more violent. Studies
No,
show
they
that.
don't. This is interesting. So, because I studied this, I mean, I see people, your best risk, for example, to release on parole is a murderer, by
Right.
far.
Yeah, well,
Be-
murder
Because
happens.
they murdered someone, and that murder tends to have been, these are not contract hitmen, these are not, they're kind of sloppy in their work here, so they get caught, you know. I mean, the clearance rates on murders are not that high. The clearance rates, they found the person, it's like about 50 or 60%.
Most of those are the people you have breakfast with.
So murderers, yeah, because the murderers knew each other, they knew each other, and there was a dispute, and it's kind of like what you call a one-time thing, and someone got killed in that event. Now that person is probably going to do 25, 30 years in prison because of the sentence they're going to get. And if they get parole, they probably won't get parole the first time, or second, or third time. But they'll get out eventually. But by the time they get out, they're like 55 years or 60 years old. That's really old for a criminal. I mean, it's just, you can just look at the arrest rates. It is right in that 15 to 25 age group. That's where the arrests are occurring.
No, I guess my question was just when you saw the drop, and I forget the years we were talking about, so I was paying attention, but when it dropped, it seemed like over 4 years. Was it just, oh, people being raised better in 4 years, or was it some sort of intervention, like nonviolent drug crimes, like there's a
No,
legalization of marijuana, there's all these other.
Yeah, the drop occurred because of two things, two big things. One was what we call the aging of the population. So the population got older. U.S. population, it's getting older and older. And the fertility rates were producing that. We're not producing that many children. And then the inflation rate. So those are the things that dropped the crime rate. We looked at police per capita, we looked at incarceration rates, we looked at a whole bunch of variables, but those are like the key variables. And that's why right now there's an uptick in 2021 in the crime rate, and we think that's clearly because the inflation rate has gone up. But the fertility rates are staying low, and that's a good sign in terms of crime. Low fertility rates means the children are being raised in smaller households, and they're being chosen, as opposed to being, not chosen. So it's really important to understand that these macro factors are driving crime rates, not so much, what we do with the criminal justice system. I was involved in the California prison system. They were extremely overcrowded. Federal courts came in and said, you got to lower this population. So we developed a plan to do that. And we dropped it from like 160,000 to 95,000. And during that time, the crime rate dropped. I said, it's going to keep on dropping, not because you're lowering the prison population, but because of these other larger macro level factors. The other thing that's interesting about recidivism, people coming out of the prison system, is that it doesn't matter so much how much time you spend in prison in terms of the recidivism rate. So someone that does 2 years versus 3 years, there's no difference in recidivism. But there's a huge difference in the size of the prison population. The average length of stay in prison is about 2.5 years. That's the average. So when people ask me, well, how are you going to lower this prison population? I'm going to cut the length of stay by 3 or 4 months. It'll drop it, 10 or 15% and have no impact on crime rates or recidivism rates. So it's an interesting. I don't talk about early release and like that. I talk about proper release, and releasing someone who are also ready to go and have some kind of home or services out there to help, because you know, they do about 30 to 40% of people released from prison come back to prison again, and about 70% get rearrested again. They get rearrested for less serious crimes, so they don't come back because they're kind of burning out. But we have about 30 to 40% coming back, and that has been constant for 40 years since we've been measuring. It's always like 30 to 40%.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Of those that return to jail or to prison,
Yeah.
that 30% you're talking about,
Yeah.
do they do it because jail is more comfortable for them, it's what they understand? Or do they do it because, well, they're just criminals?
Yeah. Well, what we call the deterrent effect is gone for them. Because before you go to prison, you know, you've probably been arrested several times before, and you've been to the jail, which is a worse place to go to than prison.
Okay,
Jail is for, you know, pre-trial.
okay.
So I think, you know, I would say the people that are coming back have serious drug addiction problems and or alcoholism. And they just have no way of surviving. And we probably all know people like that. I do. I know. Melissa, we know some people like that. Who just, you know, you can put all the money you want in them, and they just, I don't know what it would take for them to hit ground zero, but they're just, all we're really doing is kind of holding them in some kind of situation, but we can't fix them. If we could fix them, I think $1 million, you know, I just can't fix them.
James, you mentioned proper upbringing. What in the research constitutes a proper upbringing? Because
Generally, a mother and a father, you know, who are employed, who they don't be well educated, but they're educated enough so they themselves know the value of education, and so they instill that in their children. And so I think that to me is proper upbringing, you know, and that your children are being taught there's certain values and the way you respect people and you behave, you know, and they learn that early on. If that isn't there, and that child is, when they run the streets, just running in the streets, and they learn from people just like them, you know, young boys just like them, then they form a gang. Gangs is a big problem, one of our big problems in our country. Gangs are like a family. You know, they take care of each other, but they do it in a violent, organized crime methodology. So, to me, that's what's being raised properly. Like I was raised properly. My parents were very conservative. My mother taught at Wheaton College.
Yeah.
Wheaton College? Yes, Wheaton College, home of Billy Graham. So my mother taught Billy Graham. She was probably one of the first women professors in the country.
wow.
I was going to say something also about the workforce and women. When I started working in corrections, there were no women in corrections in administration positions. We're not allowed to be guards. Today is just the opposite. I'd say at least a third of the prison directors are women. At least 40% of the workforce are women working in these prisons. And this is one of the challenges I did want to mention, especially here in South Carolina. We have an extreme shortage of people working in prisons and jails. I mean, extreme shortage. To the extent that South Carolina is offering a $7,500 bonus if you sign on to be a correctional officer. And that's on top of starting at $39,000, which is pretty high for South Carolina. Even with that, they can't find enough people to work in these prisons. So because of that, what we're trying to do is say, okay, if we can't find more people, let's bring the prison population down to where we do have sufficient workers to make the place safe. I'll never forget walking into a South Carolina prison, and there 120 guys, you know, and there was one female officer in that unit. She must have been 19 years old, and she was in charge of that unit.
Wow.
So I felt bad.
Got a question. Well, I was just gonna say, you have 3 brothers and sisters, right? Can you tell us what they do?
Okay, my brother, I have a brother who is a physicist
I knew it.
at Princeton University. He's the smart one.
I knew it. I knew it.
And my sister is a professor of social work at a university in Chicago. And I've got a PhD,
Wow.
so we got a lot of brain drain going on
Sure
here.
do.
But, yeah.
Hi, Dr. Austin. We have one of the live participants who wants to know what does it mean to have criminal justice?
What does it mean to have criminal justice?
Criminal justice.
Criminal justice. People need to be held accountable for their behavior, but the punishment needs to be proportional to the crime. And I think where we kind of got off why the prison population went so high, we got disproportionate on the punishment. We went over the top on that one. And we're slowly bringing it back down so that people don't get destroyed, you know, in terms of being incarcerated for too long a period of time. That was the number one thing. Well, there's some things. People were being locked up for relatively minor stuff, but they got really long prison terms.
So the 3 strikes and you're out, Bill, is that what you're
3
talking about?
strikes and you're out,
In the
that kind of
90s?
stuff, but also truth in sentencing, 85%. South Carolina's got that. South Carolina has that bill passed, so people serve at least 80-85% of their prison term. And then we have a parole board that's fairly stingy on releasing people on parole. So it all, to me, it gets back to the length of stay. You know, why keep someone in for 4 years when we get the same result if we get them out in 3 years, or even shorter? But we still need to do a better job of providing some kind of re-entry services, so when they hit the street, they're just not out there.
Throwing out a possible solution, just spitballing thinking, have you seen any homes where 2 single moms had their children and they teamed up together to provide 24-hour care for the children in the household? I'm thinking kind of 2 independent families combining their resources of 2 adults where they worked in opposite shifts so that the children would have what they need as a potential positive impact to give that love and acceptance family feeling to avoid the gang enticement for
I think it takes
those
a village.
children.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
But I mean, in the
That's why we need
households.
women in leadership positions to think of those. I have not heard of that in a big way, but it seems like it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I believe, like, in this town, or in this county, I would say police know where the problem families are. Because they are typically, what police do now, they do what they call for service. And they are typically going to the same places over and over again.
They are
Because
generational.
the disputes are occurring, either domestic violence or stuff like that is going on, and or if your son's been arrested, that's a red light. If he gets arrested again, that's a huge red light, and something needs to happen here to intervene in a positive way, instead of just arresting and locking the youth up. So I think if we could use our intelligence a lot better, we could identify these problems a lot early on and do something along the lines of what you're, discussing.
So what is your opinion or view on, that we have someone who's released from any sort of incarceration, short-term or longer-term, rehabilitation into the community, helping them get set up with a job as opposed to just, makes a transition, just having a parole officer? How does that relate to the crime rate when you are actually giving these men and women opportunities to better themselves because they've maybe taken that time, hopefully, to work on themselves while they are incarcerated? What is their relation to re-entry, rehabilitation to crime rate?
Well, the two things that someone needs is shelter and employment. And then the third piece is your drug addiction, your alcoholism. Now, I think if you want to spin it in a positive way, when I said 4 out of 10 come back, 6 out of 10 do not.
Right.
So we got some hope there. But the ones that do come back seem to have that problem of, they can't find work or a lot of work, and they start associating again, with their old peers, the same, and eventually they get in trouble again.
So how can we as a community help these people reintegrate into the general public? How can we support them as opposed to looking at this, you've got an X on you, so we don't want you around, how can we help them? Because if we are helping them reintegrate into our communities.
I wish I could give you a real easy answer to that, because I've seen all sorts of ideas. I've evaluated reentry programs. It's just so hard. The government. Huh?
Not many people.
They're damaged. They're damaged goods. They're pretty damaged, and I think the tipping point is that the family that person was coming from, sisters and brothers, that person has burned so many bridges, they don't want to be with them.
That's right.
And I don't know the solution to that. I don't see an easy solution to it. They've tried all sorts of things, subsidized housing. But like a lot of these people have mental illnesses, okay? And our number one problem, we get them on medication, so they're being treated somewhat. They leave, they get a free prescription, and they don't go to Walgreens. So they get off of their meds, and here we go again. So it's just
Autumn, if you are
it's
interested,
hard,
I work at the community college, and we have classes that go into the prisons and do these, like if you've not completed your GED, we set you up. The state, at least in North Carolina, for the last 10 years has paid for that program, where you're not just with the X on you going back. You're not being dropped off at the same corner that you committed these violent crimes. At least you've got something.
I'll tell you a story, a very good friend of mine, he's passed, but he and I wrote a book. He's an ex-convict, John Irwin is his name, and he wrote a book called The Felon. And a funny story, he was an armed robber. He would stick up people, and then he would also open up, not going to banks, but get safes and crack them open and stuff like that. In fact, one of his good friends was a guy named, I'll forget that. But anyway, he did like 7 years in California prison system. And his saving grace, he got into school and he got his PhD from the University of California and got out. So he started a group called Convict Criminologists. And it was a bunch of people who had left prison and got their PhDs. Now, what was it? Somehow they got hooked into the education thing. The funny story is that he met his wife and he got released, and his wife went home to her parents and said, "I've got a new man and I want to marry him." "Oh, well, okay, tell me about it." "Well, he went to prison." "Oh, okay. Was it marijuana possession?" "No." "Oh, what was it?" "Armed robbery." But they're an example, of someone who just totally transitioned. In fact, he set a whole program in California which is for helping prisoners get their college degrees. But that's such a small sliver, of everything. So. Okay.
That was what I was going to mention was about, because I used to do the jail ministry and go and talk to those girls, and it would be the same girls. Sometimes the same girls I would see over here would be the same girls. They're just bad home situations.
Yeah, so you look at it as a flow. So there's people constantly going through the system. Some of them, they get that hit and they're done. That straightens them up. But there's this other group that just kind of keeps going. But eventually, as they get older, they will burn out or they die early because of their health care. Their drugs and stuff like that can take a toll. Hepatitis C, that kind of stuff can
Well, the thing I thought was amazing was that even when there was like transitional shelters and things
Yeah.
where they would offer,
Yeah,
you know, training programs, where
Yeah.
people would take them in, they would have shelter, you know, they'd give them, help them get jobs, GED, they would still have the same, because like you said,
yeah.
it's kind of like a pattern.
They're more it's like homeless people.
Yeah,
Trying to get homeless people to go into shelters. So at some point, they become more comfortable homeless than they are, you know, changing their life. Yes, ma'am.
I was searching for something unrelevant to what I found the other day, and I found, you know, articles about arrests in the upstate, people associated with Mexican cartels in our
Yeah.
state, in the Midlands and Orangeburg, and then there's MS-13, I know, in Myrtle Beach. Is that becoming more prevalent in our state with the
No.
cartels?
I don't think so. No. I would say so, maybe in California and Texas, but not here. Not that I'm heard of. Again, your crime rate's been going down. It actually dropped again in 2020, 21. So, although there was a violent uptick in the homicide rate and the aggravated assault, but the overall crime rate, I think we're looking good. Thanks to women, we're looking good. Which is basically, I spoke at what they call themselves, the liberal women of the Low Country or something like that. So I've done a full circle now. the same speech, but you know, I was explaining to them about fertility rates and stuff like that. I said, thank you, women, for lowering the crime rate. So,
Thank you.
Could I add something about the parole board, South Carolina?
oh, go for it, yeah.
Because I serve, just to let y'all know, one of my committees I serve is the Corrections and Penology Committee. So, so James and I have a lot of interesting conversations. And I've gotten involved with parole reform, prison reform. I've been working with DJJ. I've been working with Team Jackson Center here in Camden. And I've had personal experience with the parole board because my brother was murdered and I had to go before a parole board. So I've kind of done the whole circle. I can say this year we had some appointments to make and we made some hard decisions, and those people were, I mean, it's not just easy, you come in, you're appointed, you go before the Senate committee, so they are given very tough questions, they're very strongly scrutinized, and not everybody went through this year. And I think we have a female, I think we, if I'm not mixing up my boards, I think we have a female, an additional female on our South Carolina parole board. But I know in my personal case, with the accessory to murder, the one who killed my brother is going to be in prison forever. He ain't never coming out.
Right.
But the accessory to murder, one thing, there are a number of things they looked at, and they want to know, do they have a place to go? Because the parole board, even though someone might be ready and maybe even deserving, if they don't have a place to go, that's a problem. So do they have any kind of support mechanism? The gentleman who was the accessory, the young boy, he had a mother, he had a girlfriend, and he had a job waiting on him, and he had a place to go. Those were all important factors that our parole board factors in when they are considering parole for our prisoners. I agree, they're very stingy.
Yeah, they
They're stingy.
They have what we call a low grant rate.
Yes, and they just take no very easily. But I think some of what you're saying today, I mean, it probably comes to a surprise to a lot of people in this room. You just don't realize it because this is what the data says. This man is the expert in America, okay? He's very humble. He's written books. He gets paid a lot of money to go straighten out prisons and to be expert witnesses.
Crime pays.
He has been in D.C. I don't know how many times. So Dr. Alston truly knows what he's talking about. I depend on you. You straightened me out on a number of things. I was just a little, I just didn't realize, else, you
Yeah, so
know?
the parole board is kind of important on a number of fronts. One of, like, there was a lot of violence going on in South Carolina. So, you know, we've dropped the prison population from about 24,000 down to 16,000. So that helps a lot. In fact, this last year was the lowest number of inmate on staff assaults in the last 5 years. So I know how to classify prisoners and get them in the right housing unit, but that parole board, you know, what we're trying to do is give an incentive to those that want to change to participate in what we call rehabilitative programs. Get educated, take some drug treatment stuff. But they need a carrot, you know, and the carrot is the parole. Because you get a sentence in South Carolina and then you're given a parole date. And to the inmate's perspective, oh, if I do right and change my attitude, I should have a good chance, you know, of being paroled. But if you don't have a good chance, then the whole thing starts falling apart. I give the example, it's like going to college. You get admitted to college, and you're not told, well, you're going to do 3 to 8 years in college. Based on what? Well, when we decide to let you out. That doesn't work in college, so we need something that's more, and I understand there are cases like in your situation, clearly the nature of that kind of horrific crime trumps behavior. You know?
Yeah, and those people are not, the people you're talking about, bringing down those numbers, you're not talking about the violent felons.
Yeah.
And that's something else
Yeah.
people need to understand. We're talking about parole reform, prison reform, and we had 2 great bills this year. Great bills. They didn't go through because people still, they just would not do it. And it's holding us back as a state. And we're talking about bipartisan bills that make so much sense and will clean up some things. I just say that because, of course, I'm a legislator. I think one of them was S52. And they're going to be brought back again this year. And they've been bringing back every year. They're stronger and tighter every year. I will be supporting that more and more and more because we've got to get some changes made. I don't want to let out anybody who's hurt people.
Yeah.
That's just different.
Yeah, and we do have the tools to identify those people. We can pretty much tell who they are. Those are the ones you want
I'm
to
not
keep
saying
in.
anything else.
Right.
So does pedophilia fall in that violent?
Pardon?
Does pedophilia crimes, does that fall under the
Yeah,
violent
they
crimes?
have high recidivism rates.
You know, one of the,
They can't be
They're the ones that feel
Rehabilitate
in a high risk group.
Right.
That's probably, it's like an addictive kind of thing.
Right. I just wanted to know, like, in relation to the bills that you're talking about, Henry, so what you're talking about is the nonviolent, the theft,
It's really dealing, very integrated with a lot of what Dr. Austin said as far as creating a better mechanism and a better procedural policy of how people are allowed to earn some of their way out. It's not given to them, they have to earn it. And these classification systems, some people are, and I understand it. I mean, you would think I would be like a hardliner and say, oh, I don't care, make them all die in jail. But, you know, there are people who just feel like if you are given a sentence of 20 years, you need to, no matter what, you serve every single day. And those are people who are against this kind of reform. And okay, that's your opinion. I don't happen to agree with that. I think
Well,
plenty of
it's
circumstances.
an expensive opinion.
It is a very expensive.
And we could be devoting some of that money to preventive stuff.
Preventative is where I'm coming from. I work with that when I mentioned DJJ and the Teen Jackson Center and Brian Mays. We got funding. I got funding for Brian Mays and Teen Jackson Center through DJJ. Nobody, it wasn't an extra penny anywhere. It just shifted. And so the whole thing is we want to bring down population of DJJ, get them off the streets. We have gangs here in Camden, and we've got these new programs now where he's able to hire people and do college visits. It's been amazing what he's done since May, since he got the money. So
Well, I like what she was saying,
Yeah.
we need to pull together.
yeah, but the
And not make this a
$32,000.
political.
that's right. And I want to throw something out there. As a 4th grade teacher, I will tell you, I taught at-risk kids. I wanted to teach them. I had a learning disability back in my day. I don't tell how old I am. We didn't know anything about learning disabilities. But what I found was my disability became my ability to teach at-risk kids, okay? One of the things that my little 4th grade boys would tell me, Miss Jones, I'm not going to college. Miss Jones, I'm not going to college. And I never said to them, yes you are. Yes you are. Because guess what? They were not going to college. I was not going to put something false into their head. What do you like to do? Well, I like to build things. Then you might be good at construction. And we said, we have these technical schools in high school. Why are we not starting in elementary school? These kids know by the time they got to me, what they were good at and what they wanted to do. And I gotta tell you, I don't see a lot of people. We're losing welders. We're losing construction
people. You have to
people.
talk. Tech school, y'all. I know a lot of things people don't know I'm doing, but technical education, those are the jobs that we need to most fill in South Carolina.
That's right.
And that's where it's at. And in our county, to bring it back to real level, we have some phenomenal programs. They're integrated from the high school level, and they're trying to get down to the middle school level too. And I'm gonna stop. We can't be here all night. I could talk all night
My
about
lefty friend.
Yes, their lefty friend, Dr. Austin. So statistically speaking, to Henry's point, and those who have a hard time with if you get 20 years, you have to do every single day. Is that not normally at the federal level versus the state level? Is that not explained to them when these bills are being passed, Henry, so they can have a logical conclusion instead of just thinking, well, 20 years means 20 years? I thought it was federal time, so that's why I'm asking.
No, the big change across the country started in 1994.
Oh, wow.
Which why I'm not this is when Joe Biden was,
The crime bill?
the crime bill.
Yeah.
Which was one of the worst bills in my opinion. Truth in sentencing. And so a lot of states passed this, what they call the 85% rule.
Okay.
And that's also true in the federal system. You have to serve 85% of your sentence before you're eligible for parole, or in some states, like in Illinois state, you can get out at 85%. But that thing just swept the country because what they did, they gave billions of dollars to the states to build prisons to accommodate the surge that was going to happen, and it did.
Wow.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.